In this video, we will talk about the Drumset Editor tab. This is where the sound is created, manipulated, gets destroyed, etc. It may look complicated, but in reality, it's not that difficult at all. Plus, there are a few panels you are already familiar with. They just look a bit different. On the top, we find buttons and knobs you've learned from the Quick Setup Drumset tutorial. They have exactly the same functionality as those on the Quick Setup tab. Two new buttons here are the Load and Replace and Advanced. The first button is useful if you want to replace a drum sound in a set. Picture this. You like the drum set in general, but you'd prefer a different snare, but don't want to use the Drumset Designer in Quick Setup. Click Load and Replace and select another one in a pop-up browser. The new snare will replace the old one. If you select an entire set, this command will replace all corresponding sounds found in it. The Advanced button opens a list of commands that are helpful when you're building a drum set. I won't go through all of them as each one has a description. Just mention a few. The auto gain and default panorama to all drums quickly sorts out all possible gain and panorama issues to get your drum set to some sort of standard. So, when you load different sets, they'll sound more or less at the same volume, and panorama will follow the defaults. This is especially handy when designing your own drum sets and making sure it works well with the factory stuff. Clear Components command removes any association to Drumset Designer components. It is useful if you want to build your own drum sets, but you started with a factory drum set made from components. In that case, MDrummer knows which bass drum is there, which snare drum, and so on. But it's no longer true since you changed it. This command gets handy in this case. Save and Load Archive commands allow to store or extract all data files associated with a drum set, so you can transfer it to another computer or send it through the internet. Save and Load Output Channels lets you store the mappings of drums to output channels. It gets handy if you're using MDrummer 16 out and you are used to having bass drum in output 1, snare in output 2, toms in output 3, etc., for example. Preserve Output Channels option makes sure these mappings don't change if you load a different drum set. But be careful, many factory drum sets exploit the output effects, so if you route some drums differently, it may change the resulting sound. Finally, to the actual drum set. On the left, there is the drum list, which contains all drums currently used. To select a drum, click on it. Properties of a currently selected drum are below. They pretty much mirror controllers from the drums mixer channel you already know. To hear the drum sound, click on the speaker icon. The more to the right you click, the higher the velocity will be. On the right, we can see the sound source of a selected drum sound. First, let's have a look at the Velocity Layers panel, where we can set up, velocity layers for a drum sound. You can do it manually, or you can ask MDrummer to do it for you through Import Multiple Samples as Multilayer command in a local menu. Or you can do the same thing by just drag and dropping multiple samples anywhere here. The right half of the panel is where we find a selected layer's settings. On the top are Playback, Add, Delete, and Duplicate buttons. Nothing to explain, I believe. The only parameter worth explaining is the Mode selector. It defines which layers will be played for each note. Mode First makes only a single layer with a corresponding velocity played. You will use it in 90% of your drum sounds. Mode All triggers all available layers every time. Right choice for mixed fat sound. And random mode employs an enhanced round-robin idea. Great idea if you're into acoustic drums with classic samples and alternating hits. The rest of the parameters are pretty self-explanatory. The layer source is where we appoint a sound source to a layer. There are various samplers and synthesizers available. More about them in the following tutorial. Finally, the drum effects pipeline is one more panel you already know. It's exactly the same panel that we find in a channel mixer of each drum sound with the same workflow and commands. Stay in tune for the next video.